Right. So we are discussing the relationship of feminist theory to other important theoretical positions. And we are discussing feminism in a literature class. We are discussing feminism in theory in our theory paper. And so as such, it becomes important for us to see the relationship of feminism to literature and to see the relationship of feminism to literary theory. And towards the end, we discuss literary dimension of feminism. And our talk was titled Literary Feminism. And we saw that how number of theories that we took into account, how they quoted literature, how they talked about literature, and how they talked about different literary traditions. And there we had occasion to discuss the work of number of important theorists. The other dimension of feminism is that it has sought a strategic alliance with number of important theoretical positions of our time. So you can see feminist theories using psychoanalysis or deconstruction or structuralism or Marxism or some newer positions. In other words, what we see is we see a very theoretically alert kind of feminism. We also made this distinction between feminism as it appears in day-to-day life, where you have the work of number of activists who are doing important work, and this theoretical dimension of feminism from which they often borrow their ideas. So that means these two dimensions exist side by side, the activist dimension of feminism and also the theoretical dimension of feminism. Today, we are going to discuss the relationship of feminist theory to Marxism. And this is a very important aspect of feminist theory. And I also believe that you can use this aspect of feminist theory to your own analysis of some important text. Because as far as this particular position is concerned, where we discuss feminist theory in relation to Marxism, here the applicability of this position is easier compared to other positions. I also mentioned this fact that the text of this particular lecture is also available online. Although when I talk about this, I also depart from that text a bit, but basically the text of this conversation, of this talk is available online. So you can also read the text later, but let us begin our discussion of Marxist-Socialist Feminism formally. And here we'll come across number of important words also. For example, words like Marxism, words like feminism, words like socialism, communism. So these terms also are important. We can also see some kind of distinction between different terms which are used. So here also you can pay attention to the terminology. The words Marxism and socialism are not interchangeable, but both, as also the word communism, derive their ideas from the pioneering work of Karl Marx. As a philosophy and system of ideas, Marxism has a materialist conception of the world and history. In simple terms, it means that Marxism does not believe in an afterlife, in the spiritual sphere, or any explanation of the world which has no basis in materialism. Marxism is concerned with this world, that means our world, something that which something that is part of our existence, not an afterlife, not something that will take place, say in heaven, but rather this world. And this is a kind of materialist conception of reality, something to do with matter. Everything is made of matter. Marxism is concerned with this world, it is concerned with the matter and not ideas as the basis for explanation of this world. All explanations of human nature as God given or a reference to preordained laws of the universe are rejected by Marxism. This will have important implications for feminist theory, as it has to counter many God given or scriptural explanations of the nature of man and woman. There is also a political side of these concepts, as a number of European countries like France, Italy, and Britain have mixed economies where socialist ideas inform their economy. The word socialist is also an integral part of the preamble of the Constitution of India. Both the terms Marxist and socialist, when used with feminism, define a specific kind of feminism. A specific kind of feminism. It will be proper to use the word feminism in the plural, feminisms, rather than rather than feminism. That means the word can be used in the plural, and the reason is that you have different aspects of feminism, different varieties of feminism. Please mute yourself. The reason is that there is a considerable degree of difference within the ranks of the feminists. It is true that most feminists concern themselves with the issue of gender and the subordination of women in society. The manner in which they engage with these subjects distinguish them from each other. Feminists using ideas from linguistics, psychology, anthropology, and the more recent work in the field of semiotics and deconstruction approach their subject using different methodologies and focusing on different entities. There is a very strong tradition of Marxist socialist scholarship within feminism. A reading of Marxism and feminism suggests that they share some common ground. They both follow a model of society where conflict and tension between two classes is their prime focus. In feminism, men and women are those two broad classes, and in Marxism, the haves and the have nots, or the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, to use the Marxist terminology. Both concern themselves with the issue of power and the subordination of some classes in society. Men have traditionally enjoyed power over women in all known societies, resulting in women's subordination and inferior status. In the case of Marxism, what happens? Those classes which control the forces of production have enjoyed power over those who have no control over the forces of production, distribution, and exchange. That means these are three important words: control over the forces of production, distribution, and exchange. Both Marxism and feminism are not satisfied with the existing state of affairs, and change is their most important concern. Marxism visualizes a classless society where all dependent classes have been liberated. It strives for the stage of communism and social. It strives for that stage, and communism and socialism is just a midpoint in this ideal. Feminism is probably even more interested in the concept of change. It visualizes a stage. Which stage it visualizes? It visualizes a stage where all discrimination on the basis of gender has disappeared and there are only equal opportunities for women, and there are not only equal opportunities for women but a complete equality of sexes. Both Marxism and feminism, and here I'm talking about activists, Marxism and feminist activists both Marxist and feminist activists focus more on making people aware of their rights, bringing in more and more people in their fold, organizing protests and demonstrations, and seeking legal and political safeguards. The question relating to women was discussed by Frederick Engels in his book, The Origin of the Family. This is the title of Frederick Engels' book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. In fact, Marxism does not make a separate case for the exploitation of women. Women are part of the depressed classes who will be liberated once the capitalist system, that is Marxist prime target, is overthrown. Economic determinism is a very important concept in Marxism. Literally, this means that economy determines the nature of most things in society. The concept rests on the belief that society has an economic base. And what is that? It has an economic base and a superstructure. Superstructure consists of world of ideas, which may include religion, art, and literature. In other words, in classical Marxist theory, economy rather than patriarchy is the key factor. As patriarchy is the prime target of attack in the work of most feminist theories, they are not comfortable with so much emphasis given to economy. And you know that economy is given that much emphasis in Marxist theory. So feminists disagree. Obviously, many feminists find the exclusion of women in this scheme problematic, whereas traditional Marxist scholars believe that with the overthrow of capitalism, women would be liberated. Those who consider patriarchy as the main culprit in the exploitation of women do not appear too hopeful. In traditional Marxist account, capitalism, and in the traditional feminist account, patriarchy is the target. So you understand patriarchy for feminism and economy for Marxism. These are the terms. Right. Now here we see the other aspects of feminism as well. And we can say that capitalism and patriarchy both may have a material base. But as Hartman emphasizes, he's an important thinker, but as Hartman emphasizes, they are, and I quote her words, interlocking sets of social relations. Interlocking sets of social relations. When you interlock, that means there are two things. It is the task before literary critics to discover the instances of interlocking between capitalism and patriarchy in the works of literature. M.K. Ruthven rightly says that, and I quote Ruthven's words, it should not be a matter of privileging class over gender or vice versa, but of engaging in the much more difficult task of showing how and where such interlockings occur. Unquote. Commenting on London-based Marxist feminist literature collective's reading of Shirley, Ruthven writes that a more coherent, and I quote, a more coherent Marxist feminist reading would interlock a spoken feminism with an unspoken Chartism and see them both as constitutive elements of the social formation in which Shirley first appeared, unquote. Here the reference is to one important institution which was London-based Marxist feminist literature collective, and it offered readings of many important works, and it tried to see this relationship, this interlocking between patriarchy and gender, right? And so, for example, if it looks at a work like Shirley, it tries to see that both aspects are relevant in this work, patriarchy as well as economy. So I resume this discussion. By spoken feminism is meant a feminism which is clearly articulated, whereas unspoken Chartism, a workers' movement for reform in England from 1838 to 1858, refers to ideas which are not as clearly stated but are nevertheless part of the assumptions in the text. You see, in a text, a subject can be treated very, very explicitly, which is the spoken subject. But a subject can also be just implied, where it is not as clearly articulated, but it is part of the assumptions of the text. And that is the unspoken subject. So, for example, in a work like Shirley, there is a spoken subject which is clearly there, and also an unspoken subject which is simply assumed. Right. So it may be recalled that Marxist critic Terry Eagleton talked about Chartism as the main theme of Shirley, and Helen Taylor, a feminist critic disagreeing with Eagleton, believed that the plight of dependent women was the main subject of this novel. The Marxist feminist insight of looking for the unholy alliance of capitalism and patriarchy can be extended to other works as well with minor adjustments. Thus, and this is my reading, thus Atiya Hussein's novel Sunlight on a Broken Column and Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things can be read from this point of view. In Hussein's work, there is an unmistakable case of interlocking between patriarchy and the Jagirdari system prevalent in Awadh before the partition of India. And in Roy's novel, there is an unholy alliance between caste system and patriarchy. Right? Now we see another important aspect, that is liberal humanist versus socialist humanist. Liberal humanist versus social humanist. In the liberal humanist tradition of feminism, there is a greater focus on the psychosexual aspect of experience, right? Whereas in the socialist tradition, operation is more important. In an interesting essay titled Pandora's Box, Subjectivity, Class and Sexuality in Socialist Feminist Criticism, Cora Kaplan notes that a fierce and unresolved debate continues within feminism about the value of using psychoanalytic theory because of the supposedly ahistorical character of its paradigms. Unquote. Psychic life is not considered very important in socialist feminism, and it tries to socialize what it can of its psychic portions. Unquote. This becomes especially important in the study of literary works which often talk about the psy- psychic aspects of life. One can think of any number of novels, poems, and plays which delve deep into the inner life of characters. Many of these works probe the feelings and emotions of women's anger, anguish, fear, anxiety, and such emotions are explained as problems of social and political nature by socialist feminists. So if you see these issues like anger, anguish, fear, anxiety, all these emotions are not simply psychological, they are political issues in the socialist reading of feminism. That means that means in the feminist version of liberal humanist criticism, on the other hand, the possibility, and I quote, the possibility of a unified self and integrated consciousness that can transcend material circumstance is represented in the fulfillment of desire, the happy closure at the end of the story. And these are Kaplan's words. Reading the work of Mary Wollstonecraft, Rousseau, and Virginia Woolf, Kaplan pays a special attention to socialist feminist response to fantasy and desire. Thus, Mary Wollstonecraft considered desire, fantasy, and sensuality as being inimical to women, disagreeing with his mentor, Rousseau. Rousseau was her mentor. Disagreeing with her mentor, Rousseau, she ascribed women's sensuality to nature. She considered culture as responsible for forming their sensuality. However, looking at her work now, as Kaplan notes, what is disturbingly peculiar to a vindication of the rights of women is the undifferentiated and central place that sexuality as passion plays in the corruption. That means no mention of political aspect. Now we also look at some other interesting terms. And what are those interesting terms and their relationship? Ideology. And you know that ideology is an important concept in Marxism. Patriarchy, which is an important concept in feminist theory, and Marxist feminist theory. As mentioned above, change is a key word in the vocabulary of Marxist feminist critics. Marx famously said, and what he said, philosophers have interpreted the word, the need is to change the world. How can change be brought about in the way readers and critics approach literary texts? That means how readers read and how critics write. How can we change their behavior? Readers brought up on patriarchal norms of reading must be made to change their reading habits. They should be made to realize that there is no need to read like a man. Judith Fetterly's The Resisting Reader tried to accomplish this task. I discussed this work yesterday. Judith Fetterly's Resisting Reader. That means she didn't want her reader to be lost in masculine wilderness. Rather, she wanted to liberate her reader from that masculine wilderness. So let us see this word ideology. It is a key concept in Marxist theory. Marx considered ideology as the ideas of the ruling class. However, in later revisionist accounts are those accounts where we look at some old theories in a new light and we offer a kind of rereading of those theories. However, in later revisionist accounts of this concept, ideology encompass much more. Louis Althusser, he is an important theorist. Louis Althusser refined the concept of ideology by stating that it is not the system of the real relations which govern the existence of individuals, but the imaginary relations of those individuals to the real relations in which they live. Unquote. It's a very famous definition. To simplify Althusser's concept of ideology a little bit, it means that ideology is all pervasive and there is no escape for anyone from ideology. It is present in all those images that people confront in their daily life, all those stories that people hear, all those jokes that people crack, or the food that people consume, and the clothes that people wear. All these things constitute people's real relations in their day to day life. Ideology operates like one's common sense. It is also invisible, like the oxygen that we inhale. Further, ideology tries to maintain the status quo or the existing relations and patterns of power. This is important that ideology tries to maintain the status quo. It tries to make the powerful people believe that their power is legitimate and the powerless that their powerlessness is natural. In other words, ideology tries to pass things off as natural. One of the contributions of theory, especially of Marxist theory, is that it attacks the notion of the natural. It is important. No natural. It rather points to the constructed nature of things. So all those ideas actually are constructed. The concept of ideology was also used by Pierre Mecheret in his highly original work, A Theory of Literary Production. It first came out in 1966. Mecheret talked about a work he talked about a work's unconscious. There are absences, gaps, and fissures in a work which it is the job of the critic to discover. And here we see that there is also this relationship between deconstructive theory and feminism. This vocabulary is very much the vocabulary of deconstruction. There are absences, gaps, and fissures in a work which is the job of the critics to discover. Discarding the old ideals of unity, as Teddy Eagleton explains, for Machry, the literary work of art is decentered and internally displaced. It is, so to speak, split from within by virtue of its relation to what lies outside it in the ideological world, upon which it goes to work. Machry's kind of reading is called symptomatic reading. We are learning a new word, symptomatic reading. Machry's kind of reading is called symptomatic reading, which does not try to impose a false unity on a text, but rather tries to discover elements about a text which the text itself does not know. So text may not know something, and Machry's reading tries to say uncover those important aspects of the text, which are part of its unconscious. What are the implications of the concept of ideology for literary studies in general and feminism in particular? Ideology interpolates readers. And another term, interpolates readers. It summons them to take some subject positions. For women readers, its implications are even more problematic. They are invited by the text to take subject positions in the patriarchal universe of the text. That is, for women, there are few subject positions and they are dictated by patriarchal norms. So, what is patriarchy? Patriarchy operates very much like ideology. The operation of patriarchy can be seen in different walks of life. It is not difficult to detect the role of patriarchy. It is not difficult to see patriarchal ideology in all those images, stories, jokes, and styles of dressing that we in our daily life encounter. The clear division of roles for women and men in society also reflects the role of ideology. Patriarchal ideology tries to put women in a subordinate position and also tries to convince them that their subordination is natural. Patriarchal ideology comes through different mediums, and so one cannot escape it. There is obviously much to gain for feminist critics from Althusser's and Machera's concepts of ideology, interpolation, and production. These terms, patriarchy, ideology, interpolation, and production, now they are given a feminist slant. The project of feminist critique, whereby feminist critics discover androcentric bias. What is androcentric bias? Putting men at the center of things. So what they do, the project of feminist critique, whereby feminist critics discover androcentric bias in works written by male writers, can gain quite a lot from Althusser and Macheret. A whole lot of works, even those traditionally praised, may have an unconscious which may be problematic for women. The unconscious of the text may be steeped in a patriarchal ethos, and as such, a reading of it in a patriarchal setup following patriarchal conventions may further perpetuate patriarchal ideology. Marxist criticism has also put focus on the ideological nature of some literary forms. That means even some forms can be patriarchal, some literary forms. In fact, Macheret's emphasis on literary form does not sit comfortably with Terry Eagleton, despite his high praise for Macheret's work. And Eagleton talks about it. It demands an enormous amount of literary form, as though this in itself was enough to break the power of ideology over men and women, and it overlooks the fact that form itself is ideological. That there is no literary convention or procedure which is not shot through with historical significance. These are Eagleton's words. To put it differently, form cannot be really separated from ideology. That means sonnet also has a kind of ideological position. Lyric also has an ideological position. Thus, the relationship between the rise of novel as a genre and the development of middle classes has been discussed by Marxist critics. They are of the view that the genre of novel has often presented a bourgeois point of view in literature. The study of genre and its relationship to ideology holds a special interest for Marxist feminist critics. Genre and its relationship to ideology. Genre, for example, sonnet is a genre. For example, lyric is a genre. For example, novel is a kind of genre. There can be subgenres and there can be major genres. Now, they all are steeped in some kind of ideology. So, this study of the genre and its relationship to ideology holds a lot of interest for Marxist feminist critics. Many established genres in literature have been exposed for their bias towards male sex. Thus, and let us look at one very major genre. Thus, epic glorifies war and warriors and does not go down well with many women readers. Think about an epic. It has those gods, it has the celebration of those martial traditions, warfare, it has those great male figures. So, epic is considered a kind of patriarchal genre. A novel of development considers the development of a male character much more important. Think about Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, or think about the development of a male character in a novel of development in Bildungsroman. Feminist interventions in gender generics has feminist interventions in gender generics have resulted in the transformation of some genres and in the new importance acquired by some genres. Thus, a novel of development which takes up a woman character or a female Gothic like that of Anne Radcliffe, The Mysteries of Udolpho, has been recognized following feminist intervention. That means many novels, many genres which were considered marginal because there were important women characters. Now they have been rediscovered. Raman Selden, and I'm sure that you must have read Raman Selden's textbook, Reader's Guide to Contemporary Literary Theory. Raman Selden makes an apt observation when he says that, and I quote his words, Marxist and feminist theories often work at a more general level, affecting the reader's overall strategies of reading. Central ideas such as mode of production, ideology, and patriarchy shape the reader's framework of interpretation in fundamental ways by directing attention to the inequality with which both economic and sexual power have been shaped in the past and in the present. Unquote. Selden's brief discussion of Paradise Lost explains this further. Thus, the description of the entrance of paradise in Book 4 uses very heavy patriarchal imagery. And you know that Paradise Lost, it is divided into 12 books. So we are talking about Book 4. So what happens there? There is the description of the entrance of the paradise in Book 4, and it uses very heavy patriarchal imagery. However, the most interesting part of this feminist reading is the association of Eve with feeling and Adam with knowledge. This is important, and this is important feminist intervention. Adam for knowledge, Eve for feeling. And this is the kind of binary which is also spoken of by Mary Ellman. We discussed her work yesterday. So, what we see, the most interesting part of the feminist reading is the association of Eve with feeling and Adam with knowledge. In the two important scenes in the epic, when Adam receives knowledge and warnings from Raphael and Michael, Eve is absent. Eve is conspicuously absent when Adam receives knowledge. Eve rather prefers to get this knowledge from her husband. In other words, Paradise Lost presents Eve in a subordinate position which she willingly accepts. Interestingly, Milton's patriarchal view is also uncritically accepted by its editor, Alistair Fowler. So, this is our brief discussion of Marxist feminist theory. That means where we see Marxism and feminism in a kind of relationship. And as I have been discussing this point again and again, that feminism has had a literary dimension, but feminism has also sought strategic alliances with number of important theoretical positions. So whenever you read a feminist reading of a literary work, you'll see that often that feminist reading is combined by deconstructive reading, it is combined by Marxist reading, and it can be combined with other important theoretical positions. Even in this discussion, we saw that how certain terms with which you are familiar, especially those terms which appear in deconstructive theory, how they appear here also. Similarly, many of those terms you come across when discussing Marxism, concepts of ideology and so on, they are very much part of the feminist, feminist, say, toolbox, right? So we conclude our discussion on this note. Maybe I can hear something from you, but in a separate class maybe. So I stop my discussion at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.